Welcome to our conversation on timely EB5 topics webinar. Today, we're joined by Manuel Ortiz, Vice President of Global Business Development of First Pathway Partners. Manuel has over 20 years of public and private sector finance experience in global and domestic markets. In recognition of his work in emerging markets, he earned a National Industry Award for bringing EB5 services and educational resources to underserved countries around the globe. His rich expertise, communication with stakeholders, and cultural competency have earned the trust of global institutional investors, family offices, hedge funds, qualified individuals, and their intermediaries. He has also been featured in the media on Fox News, ABC, and Univision. We're very fortunate to have him as our guest and look forward to our conversation with him. We at America EB5 Visa, through our affiliation with BCW Securities, a wholly owned subsidiary of Riverside Management Group, provide broker-dealer services in the EB5 space. We help investors with project selection, due diligence, compliance, working closely with the other EB5 professionals such as immigration attorneys, regional centers, developers, fund administrators, escrow agents as solution partners. So thanks everyone for joining. This is going to be a slightly different kind of EB5 discussion. We're not going to cover the basics. We're going to focus on what's actually changing in the market right now and how that impacts investor decisions. One thing we're starting to see is that multiple timing factors in EB5, whether it's the 2026 grandfathering deadline, potential visa dynamics, or what may happen in 2027, are no longer separate. They're beginning to converge. And when that happens, the decision becomes not just which project to choose, but also when to act. So today we'll touch on timing, structure, capital return expectation, and some of the real risks that don't always get enough attention, like compliance and how these are actually put together. Without further ado, so Manuel, let me ask you, what do you think has actually changed post-RIA beyond the headlines? From your perspective, running one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent regional center, what has actually changed day to day since the RIA, not in theory, but in practice?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for having me with you. It's great. And you've been in the business for such a long time as well. And you're a very trusted voice, and just very happy to be here with you. And I would say that there's been quite a bit of change post-RIA. I think first and foremost, the most important thing to think about is that there are more protections for investors now than there have been before, whether you're talking about the audits or the way that funds are actually handled. Those things make sure that investor funds are being utilized for the right purpose. Obviously, we've been in the business for a long time, but with so many new entrants coming in, right, the more protections that you can have, the better. I think that's really important. And then I would say that really in practice, the biggest change is that you're starting to see a growing number of investors that are already in the US, because now you can adjust status, which is something that you couldn't see before. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing that I see right now.
I agree. I always say that, my investors before RIA used to tell me, Marko, now we're going to, apply for this EB5. That means the next day we can come and, visit the United States, right? And the answer was, no, you need a visa for that. Well, I don't have a visa. So then you're going to have to wait for, your EB5 to be adjudicated. And then, so if you don't have a visa, you're overseas. So that means that you're going to have to go on a consular interview or whatever until and unless you get a green card stamp in your passport. You're not coming in here. So you make a very, very important point that at least for the ones that are actually here with non-immigrant visas, the concurrent filing has been, huge thing. Yes.
And just to talk about the timing aspect of it too, Marco, what do you see in terms of just the due diligence process for investors, the timing of that relative to just the timing of finally going through with the decision? Are you seeing a little bit of a change there yourself?
Actually, it's a great question because I am seeing a little bit of both. I am seeing divergence and I'm seeing convergence, if that makes any sense. In the sense that I see people, in the sidelines, sort of panicking and don't want to touch, all of this stuff that is going on. But on the other hand, I see people who are very aware that the grandfathering law is about to expire. We have this pending September 30 of this year. It's possible that it might not be extended. So there are quite a few investors I'm seeing that are actually, speeding up the process. Not that they're not doing due diligence on the projects, but they are realizing that, they cannot procrastinate. They cannot, you can do some analysis, but not paralysis. And then we have, another thing by the end of the year or beginning of next year, we have the adjustment of the investment amount, the minimum investment amount. And then finally, obviously, you have the in a year by 2027, September 30, the potential expiration of the program. So what I'm seeing is that mostly investors are realizing that if they don't act, that is also an action. So in other words, an inaction is also an action. And to answer your question, I think people are mostly deciding not to wait, but there are others that feel that the environment is just too complicated, and they're sitting on the sidelines.
So just listening to you too, I'm reminded of a discussion that I had with somebody regarding EB5. And when they were looking at EB5, it was $500,000. And the amount now, of course, is $800,000. But at that time, it was a really interesting story. You, of course, could not do adjustment of status. And his son was working in the US while he was in school. He was doing an internship, right? So everything was going great. And so what ended up happening was he wanted to stay in the US. He wanted to work full time, and he wanted his dad to get him EB5. And so the dad could have done it at that time, and he decided not to do it and just to wait. And so his son ended up going back to Mexico. The investment amount, of course, went up. And so what ended up happening was the son ended up going to work in the oil and gas field in Nigeria. And these were Latin American investors, so it was a really big change for them. So he ended up moving to Nigeria. He was there for about 2 or 3 months. It was too big of a change for him. So he went back to Mexico. Now EB5, they're outpriced of EB5, so they can't invest in it anymore. And he's working on getting a Spanish passport to hopefully find something there. And so these decisions, as we're getting to this deadline, really sometimes people say, hey, we'll just wait, it's going to get renewed. Part of it is that the investment amount may go up. Who knows what else could change? And if you could act soon, great, because the cost of what could happen if things don't go the way that we would expect to is going to be too high sometimes. And I'm not just talking about the financial aspect of it.
No, I agree with you 100%. I mean, it's one thing that, by waiting, we're talking about 900,000, I guess, by next year, by the beginning of next year, in the TA category. And I don't know, like 1.3 or something. I don't remember the 1.2, I think, on the non-TA. That's one risk. But the risk you point out that, losing potentially the grandfathering, ability, and then, not being able to invest in EB5, just too risky. I think it's definitely something that people should consider. And, if they have the means right now, now is the time to act. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so let me ask you this in terms of just there's a lot of information that is out there with regard to what's going to happen with EB5 in the future and all those things. But even in the current state of EB5, there's a lot of information out there and how investors even view sustainment. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what sustainment actually is. I think it's important to basically frame the discussion from that standpoint and just where we are today, where you see that we are today with the whole sustainment topic.
Another great question. I think there's a lot of confusion. I must say there's a lot of confusion. Sustainment as it relates to immigration and sustainment as it relates to capital return is really very different, isn't it? Sustainment as it relates to immigration, pre-RIA, post-RIA, didn't really change. It's still the case that you have to have a 526 approved, and then you have to get your green card, whether it is adjustment of status or consular interview, wherever you are in here or overseas. Have that for 2 years, and then you'll be eligible to apply 90 days before, whatever. You're eligible to apply for the permanent residency. The capital return side has changed. There is language in the law that has been interpreted one way by USCIS and another way by the, shall we say, industry, or most of the industry represented by IIUSA. And that is where the investors, have to be very careful, because, right now, the practice is that since the law says as long as the funds, the capital, is being used for 2 years by the job creating entity and the jobs are created, then the regional centers are allowed to, return the capital back. But nowhere in the law it says they must. Nowhere. So, and USCIS, to their credit, when they came up with the regulations that is now being disputed in courts, as we all know, didn't really say that the regional centers must. They also said may. So the whole dispute is whether the may should be, the level of the years should go up. So 2 years, it should go up to maybe 5 years. And I can see where the industry is coming here. I mean, I can see both sides of this, argument, conflict, whatever, by allowing 2-year return of capital. It's possible that you're introducing a competition into marketplace by, perhaps weak projects coming in and, luring investors. And that would create a problem for the industry as a whole. So I see that point. But on the other hand, I can also see where the investors are basically saying that as long as, I'm investing in a project which I believe that has their exit strategy, stabilization, the whole thing, exit strategy, that aligns with a period between 2 and 5 years, and the private placement, memorandum allows me to get the money back at that time. Since the law appears to be allowing it, why not? So it's a healthy discussion. I want to say that I am really in the middle. I don't really see the USCIS being wrong, but I don't see IIUSA being wrong either. So, I can see both points very clearly, I must say. And I try to communicate that to the investors. And I basically say to them that, tenor is one thing. Capital return period is one thing. But, you're in this game because you want a green card.
Yeah.
Right. You want a green card. And you, not only that, you want to be able to get your capital back. In other words, it's one thing to be promised to you're going to get your money back in 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, whatever shorter period than what IIUSA is telling you. But another thing to be able to get it back.
Yeah.
So those are two, so I always say that there is the immigration aspect, there is the capital return certainty aspect, the tenor aspect, and then the interest rate, whatever. Those are the four big, things. But I think investors have to understand, first of all, that there is these two different sustainment periods as it relates to immigration and it relates to capital return. And when they hear these 2 years, they shouldn't be lured, and they should really be looking at all aspects of the transaction, not just the tenor. I think.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I would say also that the other thing and the way that I try to imagine it, because again, there's so much information on this, is just as an investor to think about two things moving in parallel but independent of each other, right? On one side, you have the investment timeline, and on the other, you have the immigration timeline. And when an investor subscribes to a project, they're subscribing to the investment part of it. And the investment timeline could be different from the immigration timeline. And it's something that they would just have to be comfortable with and really study the project to see, okay, what exactly am I signing up for on the investment side of things? So is this a loan? Great. What's the loan term for? Right. The nice thing about that now is, let's just say that, because I agree with you, competition is a good thing. Let's just say that we end up on the shorter end of the timeline there, right? And great. That just means that investors might not get penalized for making good investment decisions if you have an early exit, right? That's a good thing, because before, what would happen is that you'd have a much longer sustainment period. The investment would turn out great, but now you wouldn't be able to get your capital back because you haven't fulfilled that immigration requirement. So I think what USCIS was trying to do is a really good thing, and take the immigration topic off of it and just leave it only for the investment. What I will say, though, that it's important for investors to think about as they're going through the due diligence process is that, as you're assessing risk, some things may bring higher risk. And as long as investors understand what they're signing up for, maybe they're okay with that. I would just also say that it's important to try to get the maximum value creation of job creation as well. That sometimes might be associated with a little bit of a longer timeline. So there are pros and cons, like you said, to both, but the risk aspect of it is really important just to consider when you're looking at EB5 investment options.
I agree. I see the benefit of the USCIS's, at least reducing the term in tenor, thereby almost eliminating the redeployment risk. This has been a big problem. Major regional centers, major ones, vertically integrated, I must say, not like First Pathway, but vertically integrated ones. We've had like very, very bad experience where, unfortunately, because the old definition of sustainment period as it relates to immigration as well as capital return was the same. So they needed to, and the investor and the long adjudication periods led this investors' capital be redeployed. So while a guy like me would do due diligence on a project, great project, successful project, and if the regional center, could have given the money back, that would be fine. But because they weren't ready, it has to be redeployed. And now when it's redeployed, we have no idea where it's being redeployed and problems. So this is a really good segue to me, if you don't mind, asking you a question here on the, how to make this protection. In other words, we're talking about here investor capital protection. So how do we make sure that the capital stack is such that the investor, can sleep well? There are downside, protections in the transaction. So when we look at a deal today, you being obviously on the independent side, not vertically integrated, but independent side, where you're looking at many, many different projects and you're selling this one. No, I'm not going to touch it. This one looks good. So when you look at a deal today, what are the most important factors you focus on in the capital stack to protect the EB5 investors? Like, what do you do?
So I would say that right now we're also in such a great time for EB5. This is such a great question because the structure that we're in right now, where you're starting to see more senior loans, is actually a good thing. Because the senior loan position is typically going to be the most conservative in the capital stack by definition. If a lender is lending to a developer from a senior loan position, that interest rate is going to be less than a mezzanine rate, than an equity rate, right? That's just the way that it actually works. Equity is going to be a direct investment. Investors are going to have a higher return. They're taking the most risk because they're the ones that get wiped out first when you're in equity. So right now that we're in the senior loan, I think that's such a great thing. And that's partly driven because interest rates are a little high right now. So EB5 regional centers, or even in the private lending space, private lenders are able to compete with traditional banks, and you have senior loans, which is great. Now, that hasn't historically always been the case. If you look at, maybe 2014, 2018, 2019, 2020, somewhere around there, interest rates were very low, and you'd see more mezzanine, preferred equity, EB5 deals, which I'm not saying that those are bad. It's just it's important for investors to understand what they're signing up for, right? So right now, I think we're at a golden age of EB5 in terms of being able to invest in the senior loan position. And you're also at a time in a golden age of EB5 where processing is really fast. Those don't always work together. Right now, they actually do. I would also emphasize that not every senior loan is a good senior loan, right? So at its core, the investment thesis behind why you're doing this is really what matters. You could very well do a mezzanine deal. It might be a good deal, right? But you have to look at the business case. Why are you doing it, right? Does it make sense to build, and no offense, just because I see it behind you, does it make sense to build another hotel in Manhattan? Why are we doing this? Or is it a different kind? What's the strategic play here? I know now we're looking more at rural projects and those things, but that case still stands. Why are you building this? Is there a market there? And when you do that, right, that leads to your answer on the capital stack. Okay, this senior loan actually makes sense, or we're doing mezz, this actually makes sense. The business thesis behind it is really what drives things, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that we're in a good position right now as well, because investors can be in a priority of repayment position where that's not always the case historically.
Great answer.
Oh, thanks.
Great answer. So I just want to tell you about, me, because of the period that you just mentioned is about when I started this business around the 2015, 16 kind of thing. So you can see that I'm Jewish, right? I'm Jewish, but I had another religion. That religion was that I wouldn't touch a deal without a senior loan. So in that period, I said, I will not take a loan, a deal where there's no senior loan. And what was my way of thinking? I would say, if for a big bank, an LTV of 60% is good enough, for my investors, 70%, 75%, I can live. Mm-hmm. But if the big bank, there's no big bank over there, and the only thing that we have is our EB5 sitting in a senior position, how do I know? I'm not a real estate, guru that I can look at all these, discounted cash flows and debt service coverage ratios or whatever, all these parameters that they look at. I mean, it's not my business, So I feel more comfortable when there is a bank. So I came up with this thing, 60, 20, 20, 60% debt, 20% EB5, 20% equity. That's average deal. Any deal.
And you like the equity because the developer has skin in the game, right?
Skin in the game, but 20%, but 20%. So anytime, exactly, more than 20%, less EB5, less senior loan, whatever, better deal. So, but to your point, as interest rates started getting higher, and it just didn't make any sense anymore to have senior loans, and might as well get the senior position to the EB5. I changed religion. I'm still Jewish. I changed on this side. I changed religion. So, but there is still a requirement. I really like deals which have more equity now. So, in other words, not like a senior position EB5 AD and then 20 equity. Like some they would say to me, why not? Like, why would you prefer? I mean, mathematically speaking, they're right. Mathematically, why would I prefer 60-20-20 to, why wouldn't I prefer 80-20 to that? Because the 80 is all senior and the 20 is equity. On the other side, you have 60 senior, 20 EB5, 20 equity. You should prefer the 80-20 to the 60-20-20. Now, because in the 60-20-20, you have this guru that has looked at the deal and liked the deal. So that's why we in the current where EB5 is a senior loan, we're insisting 50-50. Yeah, sometimes make it 50-45, but 50-50 is sort of like our yardstick that we're thinking about. Yeah.
And I would say that you bring up the really good points there, that at the end of the day, it really does come back to skin in the game. And the other part of it too is just the business case behind it, because that really does help define the structure as well. It's just, why are you doing this? Do the numbers actually make sense? And so those are the next level due diligence things that really do help investors make a decision whenever they're looking beyond the PowerPoint and focusing on whether it's a hotel, the average daily rates, the occupancy, the absorption levels, how much product is there. And not just because, our last two projects have been in Utah, but to say, oh, Utah's a great market. Depends where, right? So really going into and looking at that at a bit of a different level, a little deeper level, is very important. And I would ask you, when investors come to you, sort of what are you seeing in terms of their expectations? Because we're living in a very different age today than we were 10 years ago, where now you've got WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, Zallo groups, WeChat groups, a lot of information out there, which is great, but sometimes they can be a little bit of a negative thing as well. So how are you working with investors, and what are the expectations that people come to you with?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very good question. In fact, I had an investor call on Friday, and this is being recorded. So for the viewers, we should say that we're recording on a Monday, the Monday after the Friday. So the Friday before, I had an investor call, and he basically said to me, it came through a lawyer. So he said to me, I went into all this stuff that we talked about, the ChatGPT, Google, whatever, all sorts of places. But what we're talking about here, in that Zoom, Zoom like this, is that I never heard. I didn't hear any of this, because when I'm talking to people who are trying to quote unquote sell me, you're not talking about any of the risks. So I'm like wondering, is this like a risk-free investment? And and then here I am, as a broker dealer, as I must, I'm talking about all the things that he should be, careful about. And I talked about there's a 50 different points that we have in our due diligence, which of course you'll see, and it's pretty rigorous. Anyway. I want to turn it to you, if I may. One question that I always get, and that is in the different structures between the regional centers. There are regional centers that are essentially sister company to the developer. It's jargon in the market is, as you know, is integrated. And then there are ones like First Pathway, which is independent. There are pros and cons in both, of course, but I want to hear it from you, how you guys add value by being essentially independent and, by having choices in the market as to which deal you're going to invest in. And God forbid, knock on wood, if something goes wrong, why and how you are, on the side of the investor, because, by definition, your interests are aligned. You getting paid back and they getting paid back is basically the same thing.
Right. And so I would say both models work. You've had success cases on both, and you had failed cases of both. And full disclosure as well, we have worked as the developer on some projects in the past as well, which I think is actually a value add that we're flexible and can do both. Because, for example, if a project does run into problems, we know that in-house we can handle things, which is a really important skill, right? Sometimes you just vertically integrate and that's all you do. We've done both and we've built a track record doing both. And I would say if we're just taking the, hey, we're the private lender to a developer, non-vertically integrated model. In that case, when a developer brings a project to you, it's their baby, right? And so their baby doesn't have a blemish. It's the most beautiful project in the world. It's going to be great. How could nobody want to stay here? It's amazing, right? So for our role from a due diligence standpoint is make sure that it checks the boxes from an immigration standpoint. But from an investment standpoint is going into things like you said, how much skin does the developer have in the game? What guarantees can we actually negotiate? If we can't negotiate a completion guarantee and some of these other things that are very important now, we're just not going to do the deal. And the other thing is that along the process, let's say that we decide, okay, great, this checks the box from an immigration standpoint, this checks the box from an investment standpoint, we're going to do it. It's very important that we're also managing the investment for the term of the loan. We also have a third-party fund administrator. We work with JTC America, a multi-billion-dollar company, as an added layer. We could do it ourselves, right? But now you have a third-party fund administrator. You have us. We actually have a construction management company that's also verifying things as well. So we have a lot of layers and a lot of protections for investors to make sure that it's not that we don't trust the developer, but we just want to make sure that we're ultra conservative in the way that we do things to protect investors. And we were doing that pre-RIA. Now, post-RIA, that you have more protection for investors, it's an even better thing.
Excellent. Now, I mean, the independent model, basically, what I thought was mostly what you do, as the objectivity, diversification across developers. And the integrated model, obviously, as you said, it has its own advantages, that control and alignment, and one place. You go one place, and I say that to the investors. You decide. I mean, they ask me, Marko, what do you prefer? There's nothing to prefer. It's both have its advantages, and I mean, to be frank, sometimes people are not comfortable to give money to one pocket where that money is being lent to the other pocket. I mean, that is the integrated model. But while you're aware of this potential conflict, there is a benefit that comes to it as well. So I see what you're saying in that sense. So moving along on one topic that is always talked about, social funds, and we're seeing a lot of things going on in the marketplace, a lot of scrutiny going on social funds. They used to ask me, Marko, what's the definition of EB5? What's the Webster definition of EB5? And I used to say social funds.
Yeah.
how can the social funds be the definition of EB5? It is. So because at the end of the day, that's really the only thing that neither the immigration attorney nor, with all due respect, regional center or yours, truly can control. It's really the investor. The investor is going to come up with the money. And if that money is, sourced well, if it is really, then there will be success. And you look at the denials, you look at the RFEs, I mean, wouldn't you say most of them are source of funds related? As long as somebody is investing in a project from a, established regional center like yourselves, and has gone through the due diligence, with professionals, but probability that there's going to be a problem because of that is almost zero. And especially nowadays, they don't even look at your application unless it's 956F approved. Recently that's something that USCIS came up with as well. So it's really about source of funds. There has been some issues with conflicted source of funds. Conflicted meaning that regional centers lending the money, per person who doesn't have exactly the enough to meet the minimum requirements. And there has been problems with that, with the loan structures. What is your experience on these source of funds?
So I would say that you're exactly right. Source of funds is probably one of the most important things there. For us, going back to 2008, in terms of job creation and get investors a permanent green card, we have a 100% track record doing that. And so you're right. A lot of that, even now more that the project 956F approval and those sorts of things, but a lot of that is formulaic, right? Because if you're doing the type of projects that we do, and we typically stick to the same thing going back to 2008, it becomes pretty formulaic, right? If you're doing a hotel job creation, you have a cost. USCIS is measuring economic impact in terms of job creation, not the people that are necessarily working at the resort or at the hotel. So that's going to be on the immigration side. But on the investor specific side, right, they're the source of funds. It's important to work with a good immigration attorney that can tell the story, right? I think that's going to be the most important part of it. And then you start dealing with issues sources as far as path of funds, right? How the funds got to the project, right? Those are other things that complicate things. And you just have to make sure that funds are coming from a legitimate source, how they're getting to the project, and just pick the right attorney that's going to tell that story.
I mean, the other thing that we can tell our viewers here is about the partial investment. That has been a huge thing in the marketplace. But what we are really seeing is that with the increased, shorter time of adjudication, once the folder, shall we say, of the investor is in front of the adjudicator, if it's not been funded 100%, at least my experience, people are seeing RFEs.
And they're also taking longer. And they're also taking longer to process. So if you're doing partial funding, sometimes it can take longer. And the other aspect of it is that you might be able to get away with that towards the beginning of the project. But once you start seeing multiple approvals start coming in, and we were getting approvals in 3 months in our last project. At some point, it made no sense to do any partial funding just because the risk was too high for the investor. Because once they get your application and you're not fully funded, there could be risks there.
There's a lot of risk. I mean, you probably have seen the lawsuit that is going on, where the 526E stage, the source of funds was accepted, and then at least in theory, and then at 829 they get a rejection. So I mean, in this highly scrutinized environment, if the person has the money, okay, maybe it's locked, so just liquidate it. I mean, I think it makes no sense really, for investors to, look at the dimes, like if you have the equity, just liquidate it. In other words, if you can, when you're applying for this EB5, by the time you file this 526A, you should be fully funded. I mean, I think otherwise you're just taking undue risk.
And then remember too, every transfer that's made into the project has to be documented. So if you can just document it one time, it does make it a lot easier. But if you have just multiple fundings, I mean, it can get tricky as well.
Right. What else?
So, we're living in the age of compliance now, right? That's one of the things that started to change, that you're starting to see more and more, especially with more and more EB5 investors that are located in the US as well. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing in terms of just from a compliance standpoint?
that talking about, I guess we've used this word scrutiny a lot. Basically, there is scrutiny. There is we need to check all the boxes, cross the T's and dot the I's. And what used to be a relaxed atmosphere where, you could say, for example, if a person is in the United States and needs to be accredited. So we were happy with just, a self-declaration of accreditation. We have accredited investor questionnaire, fills it up. I got $1 million. That makes me accredited, and that used to be okay. And then, in fact, there was some kind of a SEC, thing that came out that said that if a person is making an investment this big, they must be accredited at the bank. But we are becoming extremely careful in processing these applications because we're in an environment where errors are not being tolerated. What can I tell you? So we have to be compliant and check. I also say about the deals that you mentioned, JTC. The deals that we're really looking into, we really want a fund administrator in a deal. We really want an escrow agent in a deal. It's not explicit, I know. You can, do this audited statement, financial statements, that qualifies you. But I don't think it gets you what you just mentioned, as far as, a fund administrator. So checks and balances. And what is our job as a broker dealer? To make sure that those checks and balances exist. And that is something that we are doing much more carefully now. Post that.
Well, look at it like this too, with what you're saying is that there are so many layers of due diligence. Obviously, the investors conducting their own due diligence as well. But if you're, let's say, a regional center that's not vertically integrated, right? The developer is going to come in with their numbers on a project, whether it's a hotel, an apartment, condos, or whatever that is. They're going to come in with their numbers. But we're conducting due diligence on their numbers, and we're obviously going to haircut those numbers because more likely than not, they're going to be very optimistic numbers, right? So there's a haircut that takes place there. The investors doing their due diligence, the attorneys doing due diligence, but now having the broker dealer doing a deeper dive on the financial due diligence, all of these things are there to protect investors, which is why I keep going back to, we're just at a really good time for EB5. There are many things that we wish we could have that we don't have right now as well. But the industry really has gotten to a place where it is in a really good position. And, the future is bright. There's a lot of talk of reauthorization, and we don't really know, what's going to happen. We're hearing some positive things, which is a really good thing. The economic creation that EB5 has just throughout the U.S. is just amazing. And so that's going to be something that we hope continues to go forward post September 2026 and into 2027 and beyond.
I am hopeful that we are, as much as there is this risk about grandfathering, in 2027, September, I'm hopeful that we will get it. There is the potential Trump card, Trump gold card in the horizon there that we don't know, whether it will happen or not. So there might be a risk that the numbers might change, way beyond the 900 that we already talked about. It might just to, if it does happen, the Trump gold card, if it does happen, and you're talking about a significantly more expensive proposition. So obviously for that to be equivalent to EB5, the EB5 number is going to, because it's investment, not a donation, it might have to go up. But this way or that way, I think EB5 is here to stay. It's has been around for over 30 years. There's a legal strength behind it, and tremendous infrastructure. So I am hopeful. So before we close, I think we have to ask this question to each other,
Okay.
What do you think is the biggest thing that an investor has to think about when they are like the single most important thing that they have to think about when starting this journey? Where do they have to be focused? Because you and I, we do this every day, so we're sort of like dreaming it. But you're talking about an investor who just said, okay, fine, I'm just going to do EB5. Where do they start? What should be their real focus?
So I would say that the first thing is make sure that EB5 is right for you. So if you want a permanent solution to become a US resident, EB5 really is the one permanent way to do it. So that's what I would say is the most important thing. Now, I would also say that as an investor looking at EB5, it would be important to pick very good partners. And when you think about partners and you think about the relationship of EB5, it's a long-term relationship. Whether it's the attorney, that's very important to pick a great attorney that has a very solid track record that's been in the business for a very long time, because the attorneys don't work for us, they don't work for you, they work for the investor and they're representing the investor and they're going to tell the story for the source of funds. So you really have to work with somebody that understands the particular market, right, where the investor is from, because every country is going to be different. So picking somebody with a great track record, picking an attorney that doesn't like to take risk, right? You see a lot of these things. We talked about it earlier today with these loans, right? Where you start seeing, and we purposely stayed away from that, right? We felt that it was too pioneering. Let's see what happens. We were very fortunate that we didn't do that when you see what's happening now. The same thing goes on the immigration attorney side, right? Pick attorneys that are conservative in how they look at things. Pick a regional center, companies like ours that have a track record. But keep this in mind, because I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here, Marco, is that pick a regional center that has a track record, but don't let that be the only determining factor, because you're only as good as your current deal. It's not going to help anybody that we did great in a project in California 15 years ago in a completely different city. That doesn't matter, right? You have a completely different set of economic circumstances right now. The economy is different, the submarket is different, many different things. But track record is important because it shows that you can at least do it. It shows that you're not working out of a dorm room and using investor funds for like your fun account, right? You've been in the business for a while. That's really what track record tells you, but you're only as good as your current deal. And work with, of course, great broker dealer like yourself as well. There are a lot of positive aspects of that, because really, much like the immigration attorney working with the investor, you're conducting due diligence on behalf of the investor to make sure that they don't walk into some of those traps. You have these social media platforms that there's a lot of information out there, but some of it's false information. And you can help guide investors to say, hey, well, watch out for that, or consider this, or that's not true. Right. So that's what I would say that for an investor, what they should look at.
Excellent. I have almost nothing to add.
Oh, come on.
No. It's a very complete answer. The only thing I will say that I always say is don't rush, because by rushing, you'll be hurting yourself. I get people who are complaining to me about the attorney. Oh my God, I get this all the time, and I go, the attorney is on your side. If the attorney is telling you that you're not ready, it means you're not ready. Don't rush. Don't rush on your application on the immigration side, and don't rush on the project selection side. To your point, I mean, when they work with us, they get a cross section of deals. I mean, they get because no deal. I mean, let's be honest, no deal checks all the boxes. It's impossible. So certain boxes are important for certain individuals. Certain boxes are important for other individuals, and each deal has some unique, strength that they can offer. And if it means a lot to that investor, pick that deal. That's fine. Hopefully, if a deal has made our spreadsheet, it has gone through the minimum requirement. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in the spreadsheet, obviously, right? So not that we're endorsing the deal, but we're saying that this meets industry standard. If it doesn't meet industry standard, it's not going to become in the spreadsheet. But among the deals in the spreadsheet, there are different deals with different strengths. So take your time on the integration side, take your time on the project selection side. And how can you do that? By acting sooner than later. Because if you're going to wait till August and September 30 is like 30 days, then you're not going to be able to, now that there is time, I mean, the whole summer now, until this, at least first deadline coming up, my recommendation is for people who have already decided that this is the path they want to go, do not procrastinate.
And you got to think about like this too, Marko. That process takes about 90 days to source of funds, project due diligence, all of those things take about 90 days. And if we see what happened the last time where we're going into a deadline, what ends up happening? There's a huge rush, immigration attorneys, and this was literally happening to me. We're not able to take any new cases at like the month before, whatever, because there was so much demand. So really, you want to get into the queue earlier rather than later, just like you said, because there are so many things that go into play at the last minute. Mistakes happen, immigration attorney capacity, just a lot of things. It's just important to get in, and most importantly, you're protected. That we don't.
You don't want to send a skeleton. You remember the skeleton application. We don't want skeleton application. That is a no. I mean, if they get something out of this webinar, it should be that there should not be a skeleton application here. Thank you very much, Manuel. This has been very informative. I appreciate the time you took with us. Hopefully, we'll have more of these, as different issues come up that we can talk together again.
Would love it. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.